Okay. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thank you.
John, one person's missing and he takes the whole table. Help yourself, John.
Well, here.
Just help
Here,
yourself.
you want the crack area? You can.
Crack you, you're a crack. As my kids would say.
No, I know I don't. But thanks. Apparently I'm not speaking today.
Like herding cats. So Lisa's away, as we all know. I'll be chairing this meeting of the Finance Committee as per our rules. So calling the meeting order, look into the agenda. Are there any additions, changes? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. No delegations, no minutes yet. Moving straight through to item D1, the 2018 proposed budget amendments. Ms. Van Kuympema.
I'll turn on my mic, and I'm here before you today to bring you administration's recommended 2018 budget amendments. So we asked managers to provide us with all of the types of amendments they were thinking of, and then the corporate strategic team took a set of parameters and applied it to what was being proposed to whittle it down to what we're going to present to you today. So the operating parameters that we used was, the idea is not that we're going to reopen the 2018 budget and do it all over again. So we're looking that the item had to be extraordinary.
Is there a definition of extraordinary somewhere?
No. My gut instinct was, it's not usual, you couldn't have anticipated it, it's, yeah.
So something that would be a change in direction or a policy would not apply then?
I mean, it would if you've decided to go a different way than you did a year and a half ago when you were first looking at the budgets, yeah.
Okay, but generally what you were looking for was something where new information had come up or that sort of thing, not... Correct. Well, maybe we should rethink this.
Correct.
Okay, so I will come and see you to talk about something to figure out where we go. Thank you.
We also excluded anything that we felt was minor or immaterial. If some managers had proposed moving budget dollars between lines within their department, we said that's okay, you can do that anyway, so we didn't feel we needed an amendment for that. Anything that was something we thought might potentially happen, but it was unknown as to whether or not for sure it would happen or to how much that would cost, we excluded that and decided if it does come to fruition during the year, we would report that to council as a variance rather than changing the budget. And if something was expected to reoccur, then we included it, whether we felt it was immaterial or minor, if it was going to keep coming up, because better to make the change in 2018, otherwise it's something that would have to be captured in 19, so better that we know it, include it, and then it's in the budgets going forward. So that was the idea behind reoccurring.
Sorry, Catherine, I'd just like to expand a little bit on extraordinary. So the direction was, this is not an option to review your budget. So if you only had $3,000 in training and you decide you want $5,000 in training, the answer was no. You live within the budget that you had approved last year. It had to be a material change due to a extraordinary circumstance or some change in circumstances that couldn't have been anticipated. But it wasn't an opportunity to revisit a previous decision because that was a decision already approved by council.
Which, of course, any decision at council can be revisited.
By council, but not by
Not by you.
Yeah, precisely.
Exactly.
Yes. And that was the point. So if it was just something, oh, well, I'd like to do this because, no.
Right. Got it.
So I have a question. Were there requests made that you turned down? It's on.
Yeah, but you're speaking over there.
Yes, there were requests made that we turned down.
Okay, thank you. Lots, okay, thank you.
Yep, lots. All right, so using that lens, we then took a look at the amendments that were being proposed. And the ones that sort of made it through the sieve are before you, and I've tried to sort of break them into buckets, right or wrong. So my job is to present them to you, and then if you want details, I'm not the one, but Mr. Fark and Ms. Dr. Cottle actually know all about all of these things, so they'd be happy to answer detailed questions. All right, so with that in mind, what's the summary? So operating, there's 19 budget amendments being proposed under operating. They net out to $0, so no draw on the contingency. But just to remember, they don't include anything that you as Finance Committee or eventually as Council will want to amend. And we'll present what we have for operating proposed amendments and capital proposed amendments, and then we can discuss what else and go from there. So the idea is Finance Committee can't amend a budget. So just as we do the budget process, the Finance Committee is where we talk about it, debate it, discuss it, understand it, and then we bring the amendments that the Finance Committee recommends to Council for approval for changing the budget. So that's how the process will work. So buckets. There's yes, Mayor Borman.
So presently, everything in this report is in the nature of a proposed amendment.
Correct.
And the Council or the Finance Committee will approve the proposed amendments to go to Council.
Correct. Yeah. So the first bucket is transit-related items. So the first one is regional transit. There's a $20,000 decrease in the requisition from the Bow Valley Regional Transit due to a revised admin cost share formula. So then there's also a $149,000 local transit increase. So that's a current ridership trends are actually lower than what was estimated, significantly, as well as there's increased maintenance and insurance costs. So all those feed into a $149,000 higher requisition than originally anticipated. With any of these, stop me if you have any questions. Okay. And then there's other transit-related items, and this is stop maintenance in-house. So when the 2018 budget was put together and approved by Council, the idea was that we would hire a contractor to maintain the bus stops in town. However, once they sent that out for tenders, they all came in over budget. Streets and Roads Department sharpened their pencils and took a look how much would it cost for them to do the work, and it came in significantly less than it would have by contract. So therefore, they're offering up a $21,000 decrease and doing that in-house. So what that means is taking a seasonal position that was only in the summer and making it a year-round position. And then that person would do the work to maintain the stops.
So does that constitute a change to FTE position?
Yeah.
Yes. So we would be moving from a casual to a permanent FTE or full-time FTE.
So how will that be presented to Council?
The same way it is now.
Right now. So we will be approving an increase to in that department to a 0.5 FTE.
So Council normally doesn't, so Council approves a budget of which we make up the FTE count and we demonstrate how that contributes to the budget, but Council's not approving a specific FTE count.
Every year, budget time, there's a report on the total FTEs and the changes, and
right, and
through the approval, Council approves that.
And we would bring that information when we come to the Council meeting.
Right. Okay, so there's an increase in cost to Public Works to take that additional work on?
So we're moving the money out of contracted services and we're moving it into salary, wages, and benefits.
Okay.
And the net effect is an overall decrease of $21,000.
Right.
Okay.
And the reality is
Right.
we couldn't, even for the extra $21,000, we couldn't get a contractor to do the work.
Sure.
So we had budgeted an additional $21,000 thinking that that would be sufficient, but it wasn't. So.
Okay. So we're moving contracted work into in-house, and it's saving us $21,000. even with the additional FTE.
That's correct. So even after we've taken into consideration moving the seasonal to full-time and all of the costs, including benefits that go with it, there's still a net savings of $21,000 over what is budgeted, but significantly more savings over what it would actually cost us to get a contractor to do the work.
Thank you.
Okay, the other transit piece in the bucket is the on-it service from Calgary through Canmore to Banff. It was something that came up during the year in 2017. So in 2017, we funded it from the general operating reserve, but it's going to continue in 18. So we are proposing to include it in the budget rather than drawing from the reserve. And that's $17,500.
So how much of the 17.5 did we actually use in 2017? Because that was the absolute number if nobody got on the bus and got our cost share, if nobody got on the bus and came to Canmore.
So the actual cost to us was around $8,000 by the time it was all said and done. Their ridership uptake was very good, and that was, again, with very little advertising or lead up to the rollout of the service. So this year they are actually planning a more planned rollout of the service. They're also looking at some stop and some service changes that they're expecting will improve ridership. However, those changes will also potentially come with additional costs. So we have reverted back to the same number that they requested last year.
Because we don't know.
Because we don't know whether or not the improved uptake will offset the additional costs.
Benefit us
Right.
or just benefit other
Right.
users. Okay.
So as always, if there is less spent, then that's better for us.
I was just curious because I don't think we'd received that final number, but thank you very kindly.
Can I just
so-
ask you a question?
Yeah.
And maybe this is a question for Mr. Fark. Did we negotiate directly with ONIT or through the commission?
So we were involved directly in the discussions. Also, the commission was as well, but this was not a commission-led service. This
So
was
it's direct
That's correct,
Okay,
yes.
so it's a separate item from commission?
It's a separate item from the commission, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the transit bucket. The next bucket is the third-party revenue bucket. So the first one is, during 2017, the fire service agreement with the MD of Bighorn was up and was renegotiated, and that resulted in a $17,500 increase to revenue for 2018. So we're amending the budget to increase the revenue by that amount, or proposing to. The next one is ATCO Gas. And you got a bit of this on Tuesday when we provided you with the variance reporting. The ATCO franchise fees, they provided us a projection, and they project to have $180,000 more in franchise fees paid to us in 2018 than was originally anticipated when the 2018 budget was prepared. The next one is Fortis. So just as ATCO Gas franchise fees went up, Fortis franchise fees have also gone up. Those are $135,000, but remember Fortis gets transferred to reserves, so it's a net zero. So we get $135,000 more in revenue, but we have $135,000 more transferred to reserve. ATCO, on the other hand, doesn't get transferred to reserve, so it's $180,000 towards the bottom line.
How do they know how cold it's going to be in the next 12 months and therefore project their...
They've been in business a long time.
They didn't tell us the year before.
No. So
they've
every
got a
year...
new crystal ball?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
Maybe it's not so cloudy.
Okay. Okay, I was just curious.
And these, just for the new councilor's sake, these are fees that they collect from their customers through their monthly billing.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
What is the reserve, what do we use that reserve for?
That reserve goes into the general capital reserve prior to the changes to the reserves policy. Then we changed the reserve policy, and now it will go into the asset rehabilitation and replacement reserve
Okay, so,
for capital stuff.
great, okay, thank you. But we're putting money into that as well, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't change our contribution to that? Because
No,
our
it
contribution
just-
is a fixed number?
It helps close that gap
Okay.
that we've talked about
So this is in
before.
addition to the fixed number that we're already contributing?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And last but not least, Mr. Asarte is going to give us money. No, wait a minute. No. Engineering permit revenue is trending upwards. Guess where he is, Cougar Creek. So engineering permit revenue is trending higher, and so it's Mr. Asarte estimated that it would be $25,000 more in 2018 than originally budgeted. Any more questions on third-party revenue?
The net impact of replacing a contract engineering position with employee position.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Okay. Because the permitting revenue is after that in the chart.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Jumping around a bit.
Yeah,
Okay.
I tried to put it in buckets rather than, the list. So I started out with the list, and then as I was preparing my presentation last night, I went, maybe buckets would be better. So not to confuse
We'll
you.
try to keep up with you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All right, next bucket, Rogers Hometown Hockey. So if you hadn't heard, Rogers Hometown Hockey picks a different town where the broadcast people sit and broadcast the hockey game. The hockey players don't come here and play their game, okay? Just the TV production crew comes. So it's scheduled for February 10th and 11th, 2018, right in the middle of our Canmore Winter Carnival. So we took a look at this, and obviously there's a cost to us to have Rogers come. And so try to anticipate what some of the costs would be. So items, we felt that because this was being held during Winter Carnival, from one, a workload capacity, but two, a budget capacity, we probably should cut down on some of the things we were doing for Winter Carnival. So some of the costs can be funded by reductions in the Winter Carnival budget, and those items that can be covered by that are, we need $2,000 to provide overnight security, because they set up and then leave their things. We need to make sure we provide them with security for that. We also need an operations coordinator, so the total is $3,600, but only $2,000 of it can come from the Winter Carnival budget. The other $1,600 would come from, we're looking for a budget increase. The other thing that we can cover off under the Winter Carnival budget is the rental of porta potties, and that would cost $1,000. So those are things that we're not asking for a budget amendment for in dollars, but those are items that we're going to have to pay for Rogers Hockey. Then there are a couple of more things. We need a first aid, and that's $1,000, and as well as the other part of that operations coordinator. So that's $2,600 that we're looking for a budget amendment for, because those are costs that we don't feel we can take the Winter Carnival budget down further for. Just to be aware that as we remove items from the budget, the Winter Carnival service decreases. Service decreases include less elaborate ice carvings and no demonstration of ice carvings. Reduced ice carving participants, so the number of ones that are being done. So basically that results in less ice being ordered. Reduced contract services, no pond events, and no cabaret for the cultural weekend. Huh. Yes, Councillor Sanford.
So you said there would be a budget increase request, but here we've got it's zeroed out.
Let me take a look at my notes.
So it's not actually, well, it sounds like it's being.
Well, it is, I can speak to it quickly, Catherine. We are asking for $2,600. What we're suggesting is Council already has in the 2018 budget $50,000 from Economic Development Reserve for our event grant program, which the community, so what we're suggesting is that this $2,600 come out of that event grant, because technically this is the type of event that we would fund from that grant. So it just means that the committee who does the granting would have $2,600 less dollars to work with in 2018. In 2017, they haven't spent the full $50,000, so we believe this makes sense.
Okay,
for
I guess
2018.
I just didn't understand that it said funded from the event support budget.
Right.
I thought you were just transferring it within, but you're coming from another reserve.
Correct.
You're asking it for another reserve. Okay, thank you.
Just a quick comment, if I could. The ice carvings, we're going to be doing less of those, and we have Rogers Hometown Hockey here. It might be something to celebrate. Is there a way to? How much are we talking as far as the ice carvings go?
So the ice carving is about half of that, the additional request. I mean, to be completely honest, I think we need to start having a winter carnival that acknowledges that climate change exists and is real. So what I've seen over the last few years is that depending on the weather, sometimes the ice is melted within 2 days. And so and attendance at the ice carvings is very weather dependent in terms of how many spectators we bring in. So to me, it just feels, it's starting to feel impractical and not necessarily all that much of a significant part of the Winter Carnival event. So when we asked arts and events staff to look at Winter Carnival and to say, if you had to reduce Winter Carnival, because having Rogers Hometown Hockey here will be increased workload for those staff. So what we're trying to do is make sure that Winter Carnival is still very manageable in terms of workload for them. What events from the Winter Carnival would you remove? That was the first one on their list.
Okay, thank you.
So remind me what Rogers Hometown Hockey actually does.
Yep, so Rogers Hometown Hockey will come and set up in town. They will be closing Main Street. And we have worked with the BRZ on getting their approval for that. So it will set up and it will take up significant space also in the parking lot in between the Civic Center and Arts Place. And they have quite a bit of activation on street. So there are booths and activities and all kinds of events that will happen literally on the street. And then over the weekend, they will broadcast live from Canmore. So there's an Eagles home game. They'll be participating with minor hockey. So the idea is that the Thursday through the Sunday, there will be lots of activity and things happening on the street and a live broadcast from the street, I believe, on the Saturday.
Live broadcast of what?
So they will broadcast before an NHL hockey game. They will be broadcasting from Canmore. I know you don't watch hockey, so what happens before a game usually is that there are announcers and they're in a booth and they're talking about the game and who's going to do what and who's going to win. And so all of that will happen from the street.
I see. So they'll be cutting back and forth from the big game to
Canmore.
These guys on Main Street, Canmore. We're
Correct.
coming live from Canmore.
Yeah.
We're having a ball here. Yeah.
And I think the highlight will probably be Saturday night hockey night in Canada. It's a big deal, John.
Yeah, but is there going to be a screen here showing it or something?
I don't know if they have a screen or if they have, I have never seen it, so,
Yeah.
but apparently they roll into town and they have all of these booths and equipment. And so, yes, I think you will be able to, I don't know for sure, but my understanding is you'll be able to watch the game from Main Street.
I see.
There's one in Airdrie on the 16th and 17th of December if you want.
You can go and look.
And there's one tonight from Kingston, Ontario, if you'd like to watch the TV.
Okay.
And they do a live feed for Canmore as part of the program.
Yeah, I understood that. But you said the big deal was watching the game, and I'm not seeing that. But it doesn't matter. I don't have to understand it all.
Okay.
So,
Ron McLean and,
right there, even though he's.
I don't know. I don't know for sure who's coming. I don't know who is on the.
Don McLean? Is he going to be singing?
No. I believe he's
Bye.
dead. I'm pretty sure Don McLean is dead.
Don McLean. Okay, we're distracted.
We digress.
Yes. Can we? Yes.
All right,
Back to you.
moving on. All right, then the next bucket, contracted services. All right, so the first thing is credit card processing fee reduction. So at Elevation Place, with the introduction of the new software, we are now able to process some types of payments that directly with the bank rather than having to go through a middleman, and therefore we're able to save $10,000 in processing fees. The next one is a facilities custodial contract cost reduction. So when the budgets were being prepared, the contracts were out for proposals or tenders, so we had to estimate how much we thought those contracts were going to come in at. They came in under what we thought, so we're passing along the savings of $15,000 by proposing to reduce the 2018 budget. Then there is a budget increase, which is a Plymouth event relocation. So in the fire hall, and that's sort of the picture you see on the right-hand side. That's not our fire hall, it's just a fire hall. So the Plymouth event, there's an operation and safety O&S requirement to be able to hook up 2 more of our fire vehicles to the Plymouth event, because right now we don't have enough existing hookups.
That's the thing that takes the exhaust out of the building?
Exactly, that's that hose thing that's going from all those trucks, so they attach it to the exhaust, and it takes that exhaust directly out of the building. Because as you may know, at the fire hall, we have our kitchen and our staff areas that are right there, and without getting that exhaust out of the building directly, it tends to make it a little carbon monoxide-y.
Yeah, I assumed that was a typo, but it's an actual word, huh?
It is, and it says it right on the machine thing. They have those in Art's Place in the fabrication shop. There's 2 of them. Yep. Not as big and fancy, but
No,
yeah.
not for the arts class.
The other thing is that there's a number of software, so the planning software, the rec software, that require maintenance and licensing service agreements. Some of them are coming in higher than anticipated for 2017, so we consider that those will continue, and those total $22,500. We need more for licensing. Legal fees, no surprise here. Our legal fees have been a little bit busier than we had anticipated, and we expect that 2018 will continue in the same vein. So the current budget for legal fees in 2018 is $75,000, so this would be a doubling of that. Year to date, of bills that we've gotten and paid, is $120,000 in legal fees.
Wow, 120,000, wow.
And there will be more. Then, hence the picture on the left, the roundhouse, which doesn't look like that anymore.
No,
But anyway, the roundhouse kitchen counter needs replacement. So right now it's a laminate that's breaking down, and that causes a health and safety concern when you're preparing food on a broken down countertop. So the proposal is to put $15,000 into the 2018 budget to replace the countertop. But we're not slow. We're not going to just put back what we had before. The proposal is to put a stainless steel countertop in there, which will give it a longer life and a better standard of health and safety. So that would be more of a commercial grade countertop.
Good lesson there for all of us when we're trying to keep budgets low on construction and put in less expensive features.
Yeah. Sometimes builder grade, not so great. Yeah. And last but not least, environmental impact sustainability assessment, thank you. The EIS, this will be a net zero. So the idea is we've had a lot of planning revenue this year, and that means a lot of work, which means a lot of EIS third-party reviews, which won't happen in 2017, but they'll need to happen in 2018. So the proposal is to be aware of that, increase the contracted services budget in planning for the EIS third-party reviews by $40,000. But the idea will be that in April, when we come to you with the 2017 surplus, to transfer $40,000 into the operating reserve, and then we'll pull that out in 2018 to fund this extra $40,000. So it's sort of a way of being able to transfer the money you collected in one year to use to fund the expense that creates in a following year.
The challenge with planning revenue is oftentimes we receive the revenue in one year, but the work actually happens the following year depending on when the revenue comes in. So this year we can have a significant surplus in planning revenue, but there is still significant work and expenses because the permit fees are paid up front and then the work occurs afterwards. So this is a way of acknowledging the fact that we have revenue this year, but that revenue is going to require expenses that will likely occur next year.
Okay, so the next bucket I have is staffing. The first one is what Mayor Borman had mentioned, and that is replacing our contract engineer with an employee. The net cost of that is $25,000. So that's sort of the same $25,000 more in revenue we're going to get from permits in the engineering department. But to change from a contracted position to an employee position, the net cost of that is $25,000. So we would increase $110,000 for salaries, wages, and benefits, and we would decrease contracted services by that amount. So it's going to cost us a net of $25,000 for that.
And that's a full-time position?
Yes.
The net includes all of the additional benefits and everything else?
Yeah, so right now, our estimate, it's, $110,000 until we really sort of go out to market and find out exactly how much that position would pay. So right now, it hasn't been a detailed calculation of that number, but we feel that that should cover the cost of it.
Yeah. So is there, no, there's no justification sheet or anything for that. So the decision to go to a full-time position rather than a contract position, I'm sure was clearly thought through.
So it was always a full-time position. So what you have to remember is we had this as a full-time position first, and then the person who was in that position left. We couldn't replace that person with the skill level we were looking for, so we hired Blair Birch.
Okay.
We hired him on a contract rather than as an employee,
Okay.
and he has worked for us for a number of years, full-time,
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
So
And
this wasn't a contract, initially a contract position, it was a contract taking the place or filling the work of a FTE.
Absolutely, yes.
And now you're suggesting that the contracted position should become the FTE.
That's right. So Mr. Birch is retiring again at the end of this year. And so we are needing to replace him, and the intent is to replace him again with a FTE rather than a contract position.
Okay, so it was some time ago an FTE?
It was,
It was
yes.
filled through contract for a few years?
Yes.
Okay. Great, that's good. I mean, which is different from creating a brand new FTE.
Yes, we are not creating a new position.
Okay.
Okay, the next one is Mr. Fish is going to do more work. No, that's not it. Wait. So Affordable Services Program success, due to the success of the Affordable Services Program, it also has an impact in we get more people in the door, they want more services in other areas in community social development, and so we're proposing to increase a 0.6 position to a 1.0, so full-time. So a part-time to a full-time, and the cost of that would be $22,500. And then here's where Mr. Fish comes in. So the land use enforcement. So again, this is another case of there's a bunch of work that comes with this extra permit revenue. And also council had directed administration to start sort of trying to enforce the inappropriate use of residential property, so contraventions of the land use bylaw. So therefore, we hired someone to provide land use enforcement. Their contract runs out at the end of the year. The idea is that we suspect that we'll need to continue to do that work, so we're proposing to keep that person on for another year. That cost is $75,000, and we're proposing to pay for that out of the operating reserve. Same idea at the end of this year. We'll ask you to transfer $75,000 of planning surplus revenue into the operating reserve, and then bring it back out to fund this enforcement position in 2018. And then last but not least, as you may or may not recall from Tuesday, we had budgeted $200,000 for slippage. That was trending significantly higher. So what we've done is we've increased the slippage budget for 2018 by $48,000, which is the amount we needed to bring in all these amendments with zero impact.
Before you move on, I just got to think about this bit.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So, for instance, in that land use enforcement position, do we anticipate, is that because we anticipate that position to be a one-year term position?
So the short answer is that rather than going out to council now and asking for a permanent change to the budget and a new FTE, what we're essentially proposing is, yes, to make it a one-year term position to fulfill that work. And then when we do the 2019 budget process, we will come back, and at that point, we'll have had close to a year of experience of working with this position and understanding what the implications and effectiveness of it is, and then come back to council with a recommendation about whether or not to continue permanent or go out to a contracted service, what that might look like for the 2019 budget. So this remains an interim step.
Yeah, and there'll be other arrows in the quiver, as they say, to deal with that issue.
There are other arrows in the quiver that we are exploring, including contracted services, yes.
And given the conversations that are going to be coming forward early this next year around enforcement, it's it's obviously justifiable to have a position doing enforcement through the year, so we learn more about it.
Yeah, so the way this evolved, you remember the discussions early last year, council had a number of priorities in planning that they were wanting to have achieved, and they provided planning with additional resources to achieve that. Now, traditionally, enforcement has been done essentially off the side of the desk of all planning staff. And because of the other workload, including the higher than projected development workload, because of all this additional revenue we received, planning staff were not actually able to deliver on all of the priorities and do the enforcement and et cetera. So we brought in this position to focus specifically on the enforcement. Enforcement became a big conversation throughout the year, and we fully expect that the enforcement workload is not going down next year. So yes, we anticipate that this will, this focus on enforcement will provide us better information and help us to better plan with council what further steps we will need to take for enforcement on a going forward basis.
And the proposal is to fund it from surplus planning revenue, so there's no impact to taxes.
That's correct.
And typically that planning revenue would go into reserves.
Correct.
So in effect, we'd be planning or paying cost of that from reserves.
Well, except that, I guess technically yes, but what we budgeted to go into reserves, we have far exceeded that because of the excess planning revenue. So we are trending, I believe, Rick, it's $600,000 more in planning revenue than what we had anticipated. So that was $600,000 we were not intending to have transferred into a reserve because we did not anticipate that that revenue would be coming in.
Yep. I mean, 6 one, half dozen the other. Now, I would support this one-year position, but arguably a council could or could not, in which case there'd be $75,000 more going into reserves.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes, Councillor Sanford?
Go ahead. No, I'll come back.
With this enforcement, however, there will be some revenue generation, I would expect. So this,
Maybe some increased legal costs.
yeah,
too.
so that would be the upside, is the
Maybe.
extra revenue, but then if
Yeah.
these processes continue, then there's extra legal costs too, so.
So at this point, it's too early in the process for us to be able to accurately predict how that might play out. We do anticipate some revenue from fines. We also do anticipate significant costs, legal costs, in order to pursue enforcement. So until we actually have a period of time of experience with this and know what that looks like, this is why we are proposing to do it in this way, and then allow for a better planning process with more information to inform the 2019 budget.
Great.
Similar sort of questions around the earlier position in community enrichment. So increasing the budget to allow for increased staff time to administer the affordability program, which implies it's going really well, need more staff. I don't remember the conversation when council approved that in the first place. Did we talk about the possibility of it being successful and needing to increase the staff position time?
At the time, we really had no idea what the success rate would be, or even what the cost impacts would be. So at the time, for example, recreation was flagging like, oh, this might impact our revenue. We just didn't know. What we found is that it's actually positively influencing recreation's revenue, not, right? So there's been the only place where there's been a negative impact on revenue is in Arts Place. They figure it's cost them about $4,000 to participate in the program. But for any other town programs and services, there's been no increased cost. In fact, it's led to a very small amount of increased revenue. So the issue that we're finding in community social development is that we're at more than 700 people are signed up for this program,
Really?
which
Wow,
is, yeah, so it's
700.
beyond successful.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen when you come into the FCSS office to apply and get your picture taken to get a card. And part of the application process is also sort of a consultation of other programs and services. So things like income tax, making sure you're filing your income tax, sometimes there's links to affordable housing or other issues that people are having in the community, right? So what they're finding is that it's not so much the administration of the program, but the number of people who are now coming into the FCSS office and becoming aware of various programs and services. So this is really about spreading that load a bit, and not so much that there's a cost to the town for the program, but that what we're seeing is a bigger uptake in a host of programs and services because of the Affordable Services Program.
Sounds great. I mean, the need's quite supportable. I'm just
I'm never
finish
sure when
that
you're
thought.
finished, that's all.
As soon as I stop talking and look at you,
Well, you paused too long.
you've worked with, how many years have you worked with me now? Sometimes I have to think. I'm just being really. Yeah, and that's perfect, that's perfect.
Until you just said that and broke that silence.
Just thinking about some of the discussion or whatever during the campaign period about criticizing the town for this steadily increasing FTE, you know, our staff count is going through the roof. So we have to, you know, I want to be able to understand everything that impacts our FTE count and the justification. So that's why it's important to drill into some of these things and understand it.
It is certainly important for council to understand exactly what is being proposed. However, I think our argument was that much of the information that was presented during the campaign was deliberate misinformation around
I didn't go there.
FTE counts
I
and
didn't
growth
go
of
there.
administration.
Yeah.
So I would just like to have that.
Did you just kick him under the table?
Sorry, no, I accidentally. And I will say, I mean, the number of staff have grown in the past 4 and 5 years, in large part due to Elevation Place.
Yep.
I mean, I was just actually talking with another staff person about this because we're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of Elevation Place. And we, now looking at that, when we first were working to build and open Elevation Place, we treated it like the old rec center, and we did not staff up. And we burned people out and lost a couple of good staff people, to be completely frank, because we didn't staff up, and we were afraid to staff up. And we were afraid to ask for staff because we didn't know it would be successful. And so as it's been successful, and we continue to offset most of those staff with revenue from Elevation Place. So this Affordable Services Program increase, as an example, does not come with associated revenue, but it does come with further effective provision of service of what the previous council's #1 priority was, which was affordability. In terms of the other one, the contract engineer is a shift, but not really a fundamental change. And I would argue even the one in for the bus is a shift from a contract to an FTE, but it is a service we're currently providing. So this one around the Affordable Services Program is the only enhancement in this budget. It's a 0.4 increase in FTE.
Right, and it responding directly to obvious demand for the service, so the taxpayers want the service. It's the point I'm simply making is that at the end of the day, council's accountable for the number of FTEs in the town, working for the town. We
Yes.
want to be very intentional about understanding and supporting through our vote anything that affects the FTE count. Bye.
Thank you. So we have provincial social services that are provided in the community, right? And I know that when we had a presentation on this particular affordability program through our, through Lisa Brown, she suggested that the scope of the intake was maybe too broad at that point, and that they were considering narrowing the scope just because they're just getting bombarded with everybody and anybody. So having some sort of criteria for people who are eligible was something that they were looking at. So I guess I'm sort of concerned about us having this huge scope, having huge intake, having huge demand, and having to staff it when there are other provincial agencies that do this sort of work, you know, so.
Well, but
no,
they're connected. I mean, I appreciate what the question. So 2 things. One, that they have changed the scope. And so a lot of the scope change has been around things like people who are here temporarily, maybe on a 3-month work visa or a student visa, you know, people who aren't necessarily full-time in the community or planning to be full-time in the community. So they've reduced the scope of who's eligible for the program and are now rolling that change out. Part of what we're doing is not so much providing the provincially provided services, but linking people to them. So when you come in to get the application for the Affordable Services Program, part of the intake is about, you know, your current circumstance, and then people become made aware of other programs and services. So a lot of what we're doing is referral, not providing a new program, but making the connection for people. So that's really where the increase is on the intake for the Affordable Services Program, which even with the change, we still have significant number of uptake, and then referrals for other programs and services that are available in the community, many of which we do not provide, but we are the first point of contact to get people to the place that they need.
And in the past, council was asked to fund the program for the 211 connection. Remember the program?
Yes.
So we were putting money into that sort of thing, like making those provincial and out of community connections. So it just seems that we're really doing a lot of that. And how do we coordinate the funding for this when we're continuing to layer on top of one thing to the next thing to the next thing?
Yep, so the FCSS grant is largely what you're talking about here. We do continue to fund at the 80-20 split, and then the current 0.6 for this position is funded through that 80-20 split. What this would mean is that the 0.4 for this position is funded by the town of Canmore. So it is, we do still have to account every year. We get a grant from the province for FCSS. We have to account for where every penny goes. And so we do have very good records of what goes where. And Rick might want to be able to speak more to that. I mean, I know Rick works with that department to make sure that we are allocated properly to the penny, and then we can account for where any additional town of Canmore contribution goes.
And I guess I wanted to know if this was a clerk position that we're...
Yeah, so this is the front desk. If you walk into the FCSS office and there's that front reception, this is the front reception position. Currently, we have someone in that position 3 days a week, and then the other 2 days a week, the current FCSS staff rotate through providing coverage for that front desk because the other person is only funded for 3 days. So what this would do is bump up that front desk coverage to 5 days a week.
And there's another program that's being asked for in community social development, which is the Abundant Communities programming costs, and that's $20,000.
You've already approved that as part of the 2018 budget, right?
And so these are budget allocations that I'm seeing on this extra budget piece, but that's what I'm saying is that we've approved a program for $20,000, but now we're being asked to increase salaries for another program, and it's layering. There's a lot of layering going on here, so I'm a little concerned about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It can be addressed. Maybe when it comes to council, there'll be, I mean, we could have more discussion about it now, but it's probably not the right time, but you could meet with Sally between now and when it comes to council, and maybe there's a way of presenting it at council that'll be simpler to understand.
And as you also mentioned, the Affordable Elite Services Program is having impact on other agencies within the town. So funding for Arts Place, for example, is impacted by it. And is there going to be an opportunity for them to come back and ask for more funding?
There was an opportunity in this budget cycle. All of our partners were invited to participate. They did not submit anything, Arts Place, beyond what's already approved in their 2018 budget. And I know that Lisa Brown and her team are working with them on the impact. I mean, their participation in affordable services is not a requirement, right? They're making a decision as a board and an organization to do that. And we are working with them to make sure that that impact doesn't cause them detriment. But what exactly that looks like, as you know, is still unknown. But they did not come forward and ask for additional funding in 2018, and they did have the opportunity.
And they were invited to do so?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So that was operating, and I'm going to go through capital and we'll finish that, and then we can open the floor up to what you might have for amendments. So we'll go through the capital. We applied parameters to looking at all of the proposed amendments for the capital projects. And again, we applied the lens of it had to be extraordinary. If it was a 2018 project that is being proposed to be postponed, that was automatically in. We then looked at we looked at everything on a case-by-case basis, so there wasn't any wholesale decisions. We did look at every single one. If it was a new project that were proposed for years beyond 2018, we did not include those. So we're just looking for new projects in 2018. So when we go through the 2019 budget cycle, you'll probably see that the 5-year capital plan will change. That's because there are some projects that managers had proposed, but they weren't being proposed for 2018, so we excluded those in the amendments. Any 2017 projects, as per your budget amendments policy, if it hadn't been started in 17, it has to come back to council for consideration. So there are some projects that are 2017 projects that are being proposed to postpone into 2018, so we included those in our list. And any project that was in a future year that for a very good reason needed to be accelerated and brought into 2018, that was included, and that's the case for one of the projects. So those are the parameters that we used, our lens, so to speak. So with that in mind, we took a look at the capital. So there's 20 capital amendments proposed. 2018 would see an overall decrease in the capital spend of $679,000 from what's originally in the approved budget. 2019, though, would see a $4.4 million increase, and 2020 would see a $335,000 decrease. So overall, it's an increase. And I'll explain how all those ins and outs and all arounds come about. So it doesn't include anything from council that you may have. We'll present what we have, and then we can discuss what else. So I'll finish up the capital, and then we can get into rolling up our sleeves and having great discussions on both the operating and capital. So again, I tried to do the bucket thing just to confuse you. No, wait, no.
That worked. It worked.
Oh, good. I'm glad. So the first one is a change in the funding source. So Stoneworks Creek hazard risk assessment and mitigation work. What happened in 2012, there was a project that was on Stoneworks Creek, and debt of $1.3 million was taken to fund that project. At the time, the budget had 100% of the cost of the project coming from debt, so $1.3 million was taken. The project came in under budget, and we can only spend the money for which it was taken. So it was taken for work on Stoneworks Creek. Therefore, it can only be spent on Stoneworks Creek. So it wasn't remembered at the time of the 2018 budget approval. So we have that sitting in what we call sort of a debt reserve. So that money's been set aside until we had an applicable project. This is an applicable project. So we're proposing to change the funding source of the $215,000 from general capital into this leftover debt.
So what's in the debt reserve at this time? Pardon me? That's it?
Yeah.
Because it's not something that we see very often,
No.
the debt reserve.
No, and since that time, we sort of changed our practice. So now you may notice in our capital finance or capital project summary plan that we don't have a project that we ever take 100% of the debt for. It was sort of lesson learned. So now what we do is we leave some that we take out of our own reserves, so that way if the project comes in under, we haven't taken too much debt.
Right. So the debt would be in the form of debenture.
Correct.
So we're paying that debenture over time. So the unspent portion goes into reserve, which generates interest, which covers the cost of the interest on that portion of the debt.
Yeah, we haven't been drawing from the reserve to make the debt service payments. It's just been sitting there. Because the idea was it was factored into the calculations when the debt was taken as to how that was going to be paid back, not anticipating that we would have leftover money.
Right. And I can't remember, do we have a procedure or policy on, you just said we don't, on using the debt reserve?
No, we don't, because this is the only thing that's been in there.
Right, first time, okay.
Yeah. So after this, there would remain just over $30,000. So we'd be looking for another Stoneworks Creek project at some point in the future.
Okay.
That's the only one under changed funding source. And at least it was the right way, right? We're going to leave more money in the reserves, in the general capital reserve. So then there's projects that we're proposing to push out of 18 and into future years. There's 2 of them, and they're related. So the first one is the Railway Avenue work. So the total cost of that project is $4 million. What we're proposing is that we're going to need to do the design work in 2018 with construction not starting till 19. So we're proposing to leave $1 million in 18 and push the $3 million for construction out into 19. Then related to that is the deep utility replacement of $1.4 million. So that project was going to happen at the same time. When you're tearing up the street, you might as well do any utility work that you need to. So because we're pushing construction out to 19, that in engineering, we need to push the deep utility replacement construction of $1.4 million into 19 as well.
And I haven't looked it up, but remind me, the deep utility replacement, is that the full length of railway?
No, it is not.
Right.
So we plan to do the construction of railway over 3 years. So the total estimated cost of that project actually is $10 million over the 3 years. And so the $1.4 million was for the section of railway that is intended to be rebuilt in 2019 only.
And that's from Main Street to?
The exact section has yet to be identified. We are still working through the design process, and so once we have that complete, then we'll be able to better determine exactly which section of railway is done.
Okay.
Okay, so the next one we pushed out, there's some we're going to pull in. Well, actually there's only one we're going to pull in. So the senior center exterior envelope, we thought that we could wait and do this work in 2020. However, looking at the building and inspections, we're finding it's deteriorating faster than we had anticipated. So we're looking at moving $335,000 from the 2020 budget into the 2018 budget, but also taking a look at the work more closely, because now it's closer to the horizon and we have a better idea. We don't do as much work calculating costs further out. Now that it's more imminent, sharpen your pencils and we'll need another $65,000. So a total budget of $400,000 for the senior center exterior envelope. And the work that's being proposed is to obviously paint and repair the exterior. And then there are some replacement items. So we're looking to replace the windows, the roof, eaves troughing, exterior lighting, the exterior railing, and the exterior door. We'll replace and then paint, not paint and then replace.
And that project encompasses the entire building or just the old senior center?
Mr. Fark, help?
That's a very good question. I don't know, actually. I believe it is primarily the old senior center section of it because it was built in stages. So I believe that that is the case, but I can confirm that for you.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's the only one pulling it in from a later year into 2018 that's being proposed. The next bucket, this is a bucket that's a little more full than the other ones. So these are 2017 projects that we're proposing to move to 18. For various reasons, we cannot get them started in 17, but we know they're important to council. And so as in accordance with the budget amendments policy. We're bringing them back for you to consider and including them in the 2018 budget instead. So the first one is the daycare lands rink replacement for $540,000. And that's to be funded out of the general capital reserve. So all of these funding sources don't change, and they're already been earmarked to come out of those reserves anyway. We're just moving them forward by a year. The daycare lands vault washrooms at $85,000. The Riverside Park public washrooms, so this one does have a requested budget increase, so it was anticipated to be $85,000. However, what we found as we started to begin the work, not spending any money, just sort of internally, we found out that the park is actually owned by the province. And because the park is owned by the province, it requires lease amendments, and those lease amendments can't happen by December 31st, and we actually need to do a detailed survey in order to go to the province to get a lease amendment. We'll need $15,000 to do that survey, hence the request for the increase. Mayor Borman?
If any of us know why it still belongs to the province.
I don't know. Mr. Fark, have you heard?
There are a number of remnant parcels throughout the town that still belong to the province, and for a number of reasons, I suspect that there was never any need nor intent to have them transferred ownership to the town.
It'd be nice of them.
Yeah, there is, and with Riverside Park specifically.
Well, the dike would be outside of the.
Sorry?
I mean, the dike would be separate from the park.
But the point I was going to make is because, specifically for Riverside Park, because of the dike system, I mean, they would require an access right-of-way anyway in order to be able to maintain the dike, so it's probably not practical to transfer that particular one. But again, it's a remnant parcel for which there was never any need to see it transferred to the town.
No need, no. No, okay.
Okay.
Esme?
Is there a map or a document that shows where all those parcels are?
Yes, I mean, our GIS system maps out the ownership of every parcel in the town of Canmore, including all the ones that are provincially owned. We haven't actually run a version of it that just shows the provincially owned parcel, although that would be simple enough to do, but if there's any parcel that you're curious about, you can determine the ownership of quite simply.
I was just thinking that when in future projects come up, that might be something that is put in the RFP, that the contractor must determine the ownership of the, or whatever, just so that you don't have those unexpected
Yes,
leaps.
fair point, yes.
Okay. Next one is Bow Valley Trails plan for $20,000. We just got a late start, so we're looking to be able to continue. We still think it's a priority. Visitor accommodation review for $50,000. Planning's been just a little bit busy as reflected by their revenue. They haven't got to this visitor accommodation. They're also looking to do a scope change. So the original budget was to just look at visitor accommodation. However, with the uptake of tourist home short-term rentals in residential areas, we would like to include that in this study or in this review. So therefore, we're asking to move it to 2018 and to expand the horizons a little bit on that.
And so if I would just build on that somewhat. So this actually wasn't a busyness issue with this particular project. What we had discussed with council all along was that in 2017, the only action we would take on this project was going to be to convene a meeting of essentially affected owners, which we did. So we conducted that meeting, we held that workshop. We were expecting that there would be some costs incurred in that, which was why it was a 2017 project. In the end, we were actually able to hold the meeting here at the Civic Center, and it was internal staff resources that managed that, so there really wasn't a cost associated with it. So the intent was to hold that meeting, gather some information, and then use that information to inform further work in 2018. So the change in scope that we were referring to is we consider the visitor accommodation issue to be part of the broader tourist home discussion that was always planned to take part in 2018 as part of that review. So we are proposing to move this to 2018 and then include this work in that scope of work. So it would be a change of scope within the capital project.
Thank you for the clarification.
So the project sheet had a $50,000 budget, that'd be 100,000 now?
No. So it remains $50,000. We're simply moving 50,000 from 2017 to 2018. So what we're expanding the scope of what that $50,000 can be spent on. Yeah.
Expanding scope, not cost, okay.
That's right, yes. So we're clarifying that that $50,000 can be used to address the wider question of visitor accommodation, tourist home, Airbnb, vacation rental, as part of tackling that entire project, because they are all interrelated. And you can't really tackle one part of it without addressing all of it.
It's kind of what we've been waiting for some time.
Indeed.
Patience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so then the last one we're proposing to move from 17 to 18 is the Stones Canyon Creek mitigation. We have got to get different words to describe our creeks because
Yeah,
they're all
really.
too familiar, like similar. Anyway, Stones Canyon Creek mitigation work, we've had a delayed start, so we're looking to move $80,000 out of 17 and into 18 for that project.
And this is related exclusively to the judicial review on the Peaks development. Essentially, this work is required and is planned as part of that development, and since we do not have an answer yet from the courts, then we have to move it into 2018.
Then we have an opportunity for 3 new grant-funded projects. There is a shared information feasibility study, so the idea is the town of Canmore would partner with the town of Banff to look at the feasibility of developing a regional shared services for municipal records management. So we were able and successful to get a $30,000 grant, but we need council's permission to spend the grant. That's the one. The next one is XYZ Creek's hazard assessment of $225,000. 90% of that would be paid from grant. 10% we're proposing to come from the general capital reserve. 10% is $22,500.
The first one, there's been discussion of that before at council.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, council had to approve, in order to apply for the grant, we had to have an approval from council to be able to submit the grant.
Right.
So council did give us that approval, and then we've got notification that we did receive the grant.
And now you need approval to spend it
Correct.
through a capital project.
Right.
Yeah.
Money's in the bank.
In the bank. All righty.
Okay, so that's the shared information services, XYZ Creek. The last one is Echo Creek. Thank goodness no more Stones Creeks, just Echo Creek hazard assessment, same idea at $120,000 cost, 90% grant, 10% gen cap. So that would be $12,000 out of our general capital reserve.
So these are the final 2 creeks, steep creeks in the Canmore municipal footprint that have yet to be studied. So we applied for grants in order to complete that study program. The grants have been approved, and so there is a matching municipal contribution. However, the positive news is, so at the time we applied for the grants, those were the cost estimates that were involved. Since that time, we've done further work with our consultant to refine the process. So we're actually optimistic that the full amount will not be required. But because that was the grant amount that was applied for, that is the amount that we have included here, so it will be up to that amount, but we're optimistic that we will spend less, in which case our 10% will be less, but also the provincial contribution will be less.
BGC continues to be the consultant?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, so those are the 3 new grant-funded, or mostly grant-funded projects. The next bucket is for new projects that we're proposing to fund out of reserves, mostly out of general capital, but there is one out of the photo radar reserve. So the first one is the Bow Valley Trail and TP Town transportation planning for $130,000. That includes engagement and conceptual design. Mr. Fark, do you want to add anything to that, or?
It's justification sheet is in there, so
Yep.
they have questions.
Any questions on that one?
Yeah, I'm trying to, just when I was looking at the project sheet, I'm trying to, the map that's attached, there's a disjunct for me. So we're talking about basically building a sidewalk along Bow Valley Trail.
So What will eventually be required, so Bow Valley Trail, we have had a couple of projects that have come on recently, the hotel developments, the redevelopments, that resulted in sections of separated, protected bike lanes and pedestrian facilities being created, but they're only segments. So we haven't done the work to actually plan out the full corridor, right? And so the intent here is we need to do the work in conjunction with TP Town, because it's the connectivity with TP Town that we are trying to accomplish. We needed to go through a planning exercise to actually plan out the full corridor in order to actually be able to complete the connections along Bow Valley Trail as we build out the 5-year capital plan. So it's more than a sidewalk. It is the full, complete streets infrastructure that will need to be completed. And this is the planning work that needs to be done in order to develop the plans to allow us to do that.
So the connection to TP Town is it provides better linkages from TP Town to elsewhere.
That's correct.
Right. On the map, in blue, there's this crossing across the Trans-Canada, and I'm not sure if that is on the map for a future purpose or if somehow it relates to this project.
So it is on the map for future purposes. We've discussed a number of times with council, and it is in our long-term capital plan. As the Palliser area gets built out, there will be a need for a pedestrian overpass or underpass facility to allow the people on that side to get across and access into downtown. We will need then to consider that connectivity in that whole corridor,
flowing
right?
into there, I get it. Maybe for the sake of this year, we could call that future crossing rather than crossing.
We could
may
call
suggest that this crossing is part of the whole project, although clearly it isn't, but it's in the
No,
map.
The only part of it that is part of this project is the planning for absorbing that traffic, that pedestrian and cyclist traffic eventually.
To that point, and I know it doesn't relate immediately, but I thought the discussion as of late from planning and engineering was that future crossing would be further west from that.
So the reason why that blue section is as large as it is because it is difficult at this point in time to pinpoint the exact location of where the crossing will take place. There are a number of factors that will be in play, whether you go under the highway or over the highway, ground conditions, whether or not, or to what extent we are able to do further mitigation on Stoneworks Creek to allow for the full development of that parcel, and therefore what kind of density we could eventually imagine on that parcel.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a number of elements that it is very difficult for us to predict at this time.
And it could be planning's changed, but my recollection before Mr. Sorfleet left was he was suggesting that the crossing would be further west from the blackest in there, so it wouldn't actually fit into that blue zone.
It is potential that it could be farther west. I believe that our current thinking is that we would actually not go that far west.
Okay.
And there are a number of reasons, again, related to groundwater grades and
that's all I was looking for. So the blue zone is still the active zone within which it's likely to fit.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next one is flashing green lights.
Actually, I had another
Oh,
question.
sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, my apologies. So I just want to, so is this planning that we're doing for the pedestrian and transportation interface between BVT and TP Town, or are we actually doing work?
So this is a planning exercise. So we
Okay.
need to go out,
All right.
similar to the
Yeah.
TP Town area redevelopment plan. We need to do engagement with the residents of TP Town to discuss what the complete streets and stuff like that is
So
going
this
to look
is
like.
basically drilling down farther into how to those two, one is a commercial neighborhood, one being a neighborhood, residential neighborhood, how they interface from a pedestrian and transportation perspective, and basically bringing those two ARPs together. So do we have to wait a bit to see what happens with the actual revisions to the ARP that are coming forward, or is that immaterial at this point?
We don't have to
Because
wait.
it's
We
more
can,
spot changes.
yeah, we can do them in parallel.
Right.
So, and that is the intent. So this is a 2018 project, and we will get to this sometime, probably Q1, Q2 2018.
Okay.
By that time, we expect the TP Town ARP project to be in more advanced
So there'll
stages.
be discussion about streetscape in TP Town itself,
Yes.
as well as on Bow Valley Trail. It'll be further refinement of those two area redevelopment plans and how they interface with each other. And then will there be discussion about phasing in terms of how BBT, or how TP Town, assuming that continued development occurs in that neighborhood, how the streetscape itself will be phased into being repaired, similar to what we did in South Canmore. Fancy map, we're gonna do the red this year, we're gonna do the purple this year.
Precisely.
Perfect.
And the intent is to come out with the planning so that we can then implement those projects in a planned way over a
Okay.
number of years.
Perfect, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Further questions on the same project? Firstly, I saw there was a list of acronyms went out, which was great, thank you, whoever put that together. But I didn't have time to look up ROG in our list of acronyms. What's ROG?
Sorry,
Anyone?
ROG, where are you seeing that?
It's in that same project, the Bow Valley Trail Plan, in brackets, ROG update.
That's the $20,000,
I don't see ROG anywhere.
page 326.
It's in the main, like on our report, because that's what it came from.
Page 36? 26?
Page 4 of my printed agenda, if that helps. It's in the chart. Proposed capital amendments are as follows. I didn't mean to distract the meeting, but curious. What's an ROG?
I'm,
I still don't see it either.
I'm not finding it.
Oh,
here, right.
okay.
Bow Valley Trail.
I see, yeah. No, it's missing a W on this chart, it's RO, okay.
Yeah,
Road.
Right of way.
Yeah, so the W is missing on this.
The G's
Yes.
a mistake.
yes,
It's like,
yes.
Anyways, okay. So then, back to the project itself, though. As you've noted, this is just a planning.
Anything more on,
Yeah, I'm just waiting for,
Waiting, I think, to have your attention.
no, and let him finish. Sure, it's important.
Okay. So where's the $20,000 one? Sorry. Right. Okay. All right, that is good to know. Sorry, I have to issue a correction. So there were two projects, and I had them confused. There's one that's for $20,000, and that is for the planning exercise. The $130,000 will actually get us, all included in the planning exercise, will also actually get us part of the complete street, separated, protected bike lane construction.
Some of the constructions involve the 130.
Yes, exactly.
my next
About
question.
200 meters of pathway, yes.
Because in the project sheet itself, it indicates the primary objective of the project is to construct pathway.
Yes,
So the
Sorry.
130 includes some construction,
yes,
clearly not the full 200 meters of. We're not going to build 200 meters of pathway as noted in the project planning sheet for 130,000, are we?
so I gotta look at this a little more closely, sorry. Out of,
This is the project sheet
yes.
from last year's presentation.
On the definition of road, recreational opportunity working group.
Right,
Yeah, no,
Yes.
it's okay, if it's just, in the
Yep.
report, it didn't have the W, and
right.
Raug, I know.
So, sorry, the Bow Valley Trail and TP Town Transportation Planning, again, my mistake. The 130,000 is for the 200 meters of pathway.
For which?
The 130,000 is for the 200 meters of pathway,
Wow,
yes.
Also for that broader discussion, so both things are happening,
Yes,
bonus, and we get 200 meters of pathway
Yes.
with all this planning.
yes.
okay. But Okay, and that's gonna happen in 2018.
Yes.
So then is this green line on the map, that's not 200 meters, is it?
No, that green line on the map is not, that's why, sorry, when we were looking at the map, that is the overall planning exercise that we are talking about. Yes, that is
Okay,
not
so-
200 meters of pathway. 200
meters, that's about that's about 800 feet. Okay. All right, I think I understand that one. Anyone else?
Yeah, so there is $20,000 for planning as well, for another. So there's $130,000, Bow Valley Trail and TP Town Transportation Planning, new project.
Yes.
But then there's another one there for 20,000.
Sorry, and again, minor correction here.
Bow Valley Trail
The
plan.
$20,000 is actually for a trails planning project. That is a valley-wide, it is a project that we do together with the province, and in theory, the MD. And so that is a working group that is,
Okay.
so a number of years ago, there was an exercise to look at valley-wide trails plan. There was a need to update that, and so this is the project to update that.
Okay, so the clarification is there's two separate projects. One's a capital project that actually constructs pathways.
Yes.
The other one is to talk about Bow Valley, not Bow Valley Trail, but Bow Valley Trails.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like
So
stones.
That's the reason for the confusion.
You
Yes.
use the word
Exactly.
Bow Valley in something, it gets really confusing. Thank you.
And trails, kind of like, yeah, exactly, just like stones.
And this project is brand new right now. This isn't something that's being.
That is
moved forward.
correct.
This is a brand new project.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Where were you at? I don't remember.
I'm back to now talk about flashing green lights
Oh, yeah, the flashing green light.
for $10,000. So no, we're not going to go around just putting them arbitrarily everywhere. They're actually for the firefighters to put on their vehicles, for them to be able to improve their response times. The hope is that as we have the firefighters responding to a call to get to the fire hall with the green flashing light, it's a standardized system to get those volunteer firefighters, or those paid response firefighters to the fire hall. It also includes some money for signage, some education through the media so people know what the green flashing lights are and how they're supposed to respond. It doesn't help just to put the light in if no one knows what that means.
So this is different from the green flash
Correct.
when you're watching the sun.
It's not the guy who's quick with the ring. Yeah.
Right. And I remember the discussion briefly, a brief discussion with when we had the consultants here for the fire plan. And it was an interesting notion, and I think it's a fairly simple thing to bring to. What I'm trying to imagine is how it actually works. So you slap the green light on your Kojak boot. Do you go through red lights?
No, so you don't go through red lights. It's very different from an official siren in a vehicle where you have to pull over. So it's completely optional, and the driver must still follow the rules of the road. So they have to stop at stop signs, they have to stop at red lights. It just means as other drivers, it is optional for us to pull over and give them room.
That's-
So there will be no siren, it's just
Right.
the light.
The hope is that people will see the green light and pull over because they know it's a firefighter.
Trying to get to the hall.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the proposed funding source is the photo radar reserve. Next one is a street sweeper for $30,000 being proposed to be funded from the general capital reserve. We're looking for a large capacity street sweeper to support the work of the street sweeper that we currently have. Yeah,
Counselor?
And so a street sweeper is only $30,000?
I hope.
No,
That's
this is
the
the
increase.
The
increase.
increase, okay. Right,
Gotcha.
okay, so,
It's-
and that was proposed in the 2018 budget?
Yeah, we need more money.
So it's an increase to a proposed budget item already.
Yes.
Do we have a sheet on that? Or is that in?
In the 20.
Oh, okay. Oh, 325, okay. Yeah. I guess I was looking for it in this
Yes.
agenda.
So when we come to council,
Yeah.
so when we come to council with the amendments, we'll have all the sheets so that you can follow the bouncing ball.
Thank you.
Just wanted to confuse us here.
Yeah, I hope I'm doing a really good job.
Not as good a job as Mike.
I can imagine how confused I was.
All right, so the next one is a roll-off container replacement. So there's a couple of roll-off containers that we use for a large item pickup that are in really bad shape. They can't wait till 2019 to be replaced, so we're proposing to add a project to replace those 2 containers, and that would be $20,000. EPCOR was invited to ask if there's any amendments, and they said that there's actually a lift station 2 upgrade that needs to be done sooner rather than later. And so what we're looking for, and it's going to cost more. So we had a project in there for the lift station at $1.655 million, so $1,655,000. It's actually, we're going to need to do more of an upgrade, and the cost, it's actually going to be a total of $2.9 million. So we're looking for a $1.245 million increase to be funded from the wastewater reserve. There's more, a couple of other wastewater projects as well. The idea, talking to Mr. Como, is the utility rates wouldn't have to change. They're able to fit those into the model and do the recalculation. It's just that the reserve balances would be lower for a longer period of time than initially anticipated.
So the increase of budget, is that related to increased work or just more cost to do the same project?
More cost to do the same project. There is one additional aspect of work that is included in that. So there's a potential to upsize one of the connections and the piping, associated piping, which if we do that now will eventually allow us to eliminate 2 lift stations in around 15 to 20 years time, which would result in a cost savings, but the time to do it is now. So I believe that the marginal cost of that was $300,000, and the rest of it was actually related to just more cost to do the same work.
So about $900,000 more to do the work we budgeted for last year.
That's correct. And so this was, as is always the case when we plan these projects, we go out to our consultants and we ask them to provide us pricing to do the work. We rely on them as the experts to provide us with the pricing. They provided us the initial pricing, and now that we have gotten closer and we're actually looking to do the work, they have indicated that the pricing was not accurate and that there was an increase required.
Experts?
Actually, different experts than we've had similar problems with in the past in this particular case.
Okay, so we've got new experts.
We have new experts, same problem.
Okay. Bye.
So this is further to that conversation we had the other day about utility, the graph going straight up into the ozone. And we know that's not going to happen because with the reserve, we keep having to draw it down for these kind of projects, right? So
Yes.
And that's why we plan for
Yeah.
that curve
So
to go up.
Precisely.
That lovely graph looks great until you have to draw from it to do a project like.
Yes, exactly.
But that's a big increase in estimate in 1 year.
Yes.
It is a significant change, that's correct.
Wonder what they missed the first go round.
My understanding is that they underestimated the depth of the tie-ins and the complexity of the tie-ins that would be required at the base of the lift station.
Okay.
Okay, the next one is wastewater treatment plant upgrade of $526,000 needed to meet the TAN requirements. And the TAN is not just so that we look great. It actually means total ammonia nitrogen levels. There are standards we have to meet. We need $526,000 to get put into the wastewater treatment plant. Well, we need to meet those regulatory requirements.
Perhaps Mr. Clark can remind me, because it's sort of like a, it seems to me we have this, like it's an ongoing issue over the last 5 years of trying to correct problems at the wastewater treatment plant, hoping it'll work. I remember the back filters, long presentation on that. So are we getting anywhere, I guess is my question.
So we are making progress. So the BAF and the DAF system has significantly improved the functionality of the wastewater treatment plant. However, one of the consequences, and that this is what's happening here, is something has been happening. So within the wastewater treatment plant, you need good bugs, essentially good bacteria. They help to break down the waste matter. And if you're not getting enough good bugs, then you're not sufficiently breaking it down, and then your amount of ammonium nitrate that is being put back into the system is too high. So something related to the BAF-DAF upgrades that we did reduced our number of good bugs. This program is intended to actually help us to correct that situation. It is, I mean, the amount of science and complexity that goes into managing our waste is significant, and there can be unintended consequences of one change that results in the need to make additional changes. So this was something we could not have anticipated. We did not expect that we would get this when we implemented that system. And so now this is a corrective action that needs to be taken in order to compensate for that.
So what I'm wondering, and this is not a question to be answered necessarily at this time, but worth considering, is that for things like bugs and bacteria that have to have a very specific environment to thrive or not thrive, as the case may be, would not climate change be contributing perhaps to this, and do we have any information to that?
So we don't have any direct links between climate change and this particular effect. In this case, it really had to do with the pH levels of the environment in which we are circulating the waste and the bugs through. So, and we suspected that was related to changing pH levels as a result of the BAF and the DAF system.
Oh, okay. I was just curious because it seems that in time that's going to be something that does affect things. I've been watching too much PBS lately. There's a lot of scary stuff on there.
Sure. There are certainly consequences of climate change throughout our municipal operations, including at the wastewater treatment plant. I would not attribute this particular problem to that source of causation.
It just was concerning that the results we were getting in 6 months out of 9 were, for this particular, have been a problem. And I don't think it's been that frequent in the past.
It's not, but this has been a problem that has emerged since we brought on that new system.
Of course, like a new car, right?
It's a bug in the feature, or in the... Yes,
Or a lack of bugs, or the wrong bugs.
whatever you want to call it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and last but not least, in the new reserves funded project bucket is to fence Quarry Lake Dog Park at a cost of $110,000 to be funded from the General Capital Reserve. And the idea behind this is to provide clarity to those visiting the park as to where the off-leash areas are and are not. The idea will be then it's more easily delineated, and it also is easier for bylaw enforcement to be able to say you're offside or you're onside. This way it will help people understand that a little bit better.
This is part of the overall effort to address human-wildlife conflict.
Yeah. Except I don't know about that dog. I think that dog might just scale the fence and be gone into the on-leash side.
So in the project sheets attached, there's a map with a red perimeter and a blue loop addition. I think, and it seems to me that I'm not sure whether this project is intending to build both the red perimeter and the blue loop addition or not. It notes that the blue loops and the habitat patch, there's got to be conversations with the province. So is there any certainty on that?
So we are working with the province to work through this process, and they are generally supportive of the initiative.
So the budget being asked for would accommodate both loops?
No, I think there's two options.
No, yes.
And let me read up.
Yeah. In my understanding, it is just the approved off-leash dog area, that is just the field. So no, it is not sufficient to fence off the additional loop.
The blue loop, yeah.
So just the red loop around the open field that is the main dog park.
That's right.
And then if the province were to agree to extend it, that would be a future project.
Correct.
Sorry, no. Again, that information sheet, I believe, was just provided as information for the pilot project that we did to test pilot that loop. So there is no intent to build a fence that would incorporate the loop through onto the dog pond, to what they called the dog pond. So we are only proposing to fence the area in red on that map.
Okay, so this project description is in error?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to work with Parks on this.
I think from the description sheet is accurate, so pages 30 and 31 of the agenda, the descriptions there are accurate. I think the additional page is confusing.
Yes.
And so we need to straighten that out when this comes back to council for
Okay.
approval.
Yeah.
Good.
But the
thank you.
description is quite clear on page 30,
Right.
that it is just the red area. Where it says,
Approved off-leash
the
dog
project
park.
would create a fence around the approved off-leash dog park area. That is the red area on the map.
Okay. So the additional temporary off-leash dog area up to the dog pond is not approved.
So, and that area is, so this was where I guess it's been a bit confusing. That was a pilot project that was run that ended this year, which was to see if by providing people with an additional loop that was authorized, that we could change behavior. In fact, what we found is that we were not changing behavior. And furthermore, what was happening is it was causing additional confusion also with bylaw in terms of where they could enforce and where they could not.
So it'll go back to the original area and that'll be fenced.
That's right. So the intent is to move back to the original area and to fence it, and then it is clear you're only permitted to have your dogs off leash, which in the fenced area, and anything outside of that is not permitted. You must have your dog on leash.
Vote. And are we going to, it's not in this proposal, but what will happen with the, there's more clear signage now I noticed up there, to make it clear that you're not to take a dog down to Quarry Lake, to that area.
Right.
At all, leash or no leash.
That's right. So the Quarry Lake itself is a no dogs permitted area.
Okay, and so that fence will help with that, I think.
Yes, it will, well, whether or not it will help, I don't know. Probably not. I mean, the purpose of this fencing is to clearly delineate where the off-leash dogs are permitted. We have signage that says Quarry Lakes, dogs are not permitted at Quarry Lake. People,
Do whatever they do.
yes.
And so then, but you will still be able to have your dog on leash through the habitat patch, through the far area there.
So yes, you are permitted to have your dog on leash in those areas currently. There's a discussion ongoing with the province and various stakeholders about getting better understanding around criteria around habitat patches, wildlife corridors, and acceptable uses in them. But as it currently stands, yes, on leash you are permitted to have your dog there.
Okay, thank you.
So, a question. I noted here that in the operating budget impact, there's nothing. And as we know, when we put up fences, there's always an operating budget impact. So perhaps when you go back to Parks to look this over, maybe you can ask that question again. I was just saying that in the operating budget impact for this particular sheet, it says there's nothing, and we know that whenever we put up fencing, there's always an operating budget
There'll be a
impact.
maintenance cost. You're correct. Yes.
$2 to $3 grand a year is what I recollect, but I think that it's folly to pretend that there's no.
Did Mr. Fish want to say something?
Just if there was a question, I'm more familiar with the details of it. Sorry. If there were any other questions.
Okay, and you heard where we ended up?
I caught the end of it.
So,
So what is confusing is the inclusion of this map. And so what Mike and I are saying is that the fencing is for the red area, not for the blue area. and the inclusion of this map makes it look confusing because the description is very clear in the budget that what we're doing is fencing around the approved off-leash dog area, but the map shows the blue and the red.
So, I am,
You got nothing on?
I'm 90% sure that I will find out. I will find out.
I'm 100% sure
We're there,
you're
that's
gonna
where we're
find
at
it.
too, thank you.
So, I mean, just very quickly, the red area is for sure, and the blue area is something that we're very much looking at, and we want to have further conversations with the province. So the blue area was the trial over the last year, but so we were hoping to be observing greater compliance, and that hasn't entirely been the case. And so then the other option is having more enforcement up there, but the red area is a critical piece of that. My recollection is that the 110,000 might actually allow the blue area to be fenced as well if we are, through discussions with the province, in agreement that that is a good outcome, because that would be part of, well, it would be basically an incursion into the habitat patch.
So the short answer is we need to go back and have further conversation with Parks and to get clarity on this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to get the approval for the best solution possible. We don't exactly know what that looks like yet. So my recollection is that the 110 may include the blue area. And if it's council's wish, we could bring that back to you in advance of going ahead with that.
Yes, so we will have that clarity before the decision is made by council to approve the budget.
Yes, we
Okay.
will.
I can hopefully get that clarity in the next 5 minutes.
Okay. We'll include it for council prior to it going for approval.
Okay,
Can I ask one
Because
more
it requires
question
further
before you go?
conversation.
What's being proposed is a 4-foot fence to fence this area?
That's correct.
Is that, I was trying to find it in the other agenda, is that in the same alignment as what we're fencing the other dog parks with?
Yes.
Are they all 4-foot fences? Because I thought there was an issue about dogs jumping over a 4-foot fence. I thought the fences were supposed to be higher.
My recollection that this is a bit of a shorter fence, simply because of the wildlife nearby, where we have the other dog parks, there is less of a chance of wildlife getting in outside of, you know. That's what I recollect when I did a tour with Lisa West.
Okay, so there, yeah, we'll add height to the list.
Well,
If there is a change in
because-
height, it would be a marginal change in height. If you look at the dog park by, on Bow Valley Trail, adjacent to the highway, the fence there is also only a 4-foot fence. So we're not trying to, it's not intending to be a 6-foot fence, we're not, so
Yeah.
there may be some small differentiation in height, but it is, yeah.
Because you don't want your dog to jump out into the wildlife corridor.
Correct.
Like,
Right.
you don't want your dog
Yes.
to escape,
But,
because
but,
it's.
but as the picture indicates, depending on the dog, you know, they,
Well, and I think it has to do with not just your dog, actually, nobody cares about our dog, it's about the wildlife nearby not being trapped in the dog park. That's a bigger concern issue.
so
It's-
we will
it's a
confirm height.
Combination of those issues. I mean, yes, the intent is that the area doesn't become entirely exclusive to wildlife, but it's also not, I mean, they're discouraged from going into that area. And that's the piece in that, if the blue area were included, the idea would be to remove attractants so it wasn't appealing for particularly carnivores to be within the fenced area, although ungulates could potentially get in and out of there.
What is sheep wire? Maybe
It-
that's actually the difference between that and the fencing.
So it's,
Can I just suggest that we get,
Yeah.
we update this sheet and bring it back to council at another time? I think there's a lot of outstanding questions that we need to do a better job of reporting back on. No, they're all good questions,
Yeah.
but
okay. Thanks, Alan.
I just, before, if you're gonna update the sheet, so with a fencing process, we're saying that people will no longer be able to take their dog down to the pond to swim in?
If it's
Off
only
leash.
the red area, that is
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
That area, they would only be able to bring their dogs there on leash.
Yeah, so you're gonna be withdrawing something that people currently have.
That was a pilot.
Yeah, but it's a pilot, so,
Pilot apparently didn't work all that well.
okay. So we'll have to have some pretty good conversation about why that didn't work, because people won't like having that taken away
This is
from them.
part of the larger conversations that we're having around human-wildlife interaction. And really, if we're going to take our role in that seriously, this is one of the most significant areas in town where we will need to have those conversations. So, yes, it is something that people have gotten used to. That doesn't necessarily mean if we're gonna take our role seriously that we need to make some shifts, so.
Okay. Thanks, Albert. Let's move on.
I'll scurry off.
Scurry off.
All right, thank you. If it's amenable to Mayor Borman, now might be a good time for a break, because I'm finished giving you the capital proposed,
Sure.
and then we'll move into more discussion.
10 minutes?
So a 10-minute break, come back at 11?
Okay, we're back in meeting.
So I would like to either further confuse or further clarify for council on the Bow Valley Trail and Teepee Town Transportation Planning Project, the $130,000 project we were talking about earlier. What I was saying was correct. What is written in the justification sheet is incorrect.
He loves that when he's right.
The $130,000 is for a pure planning exercise. It is not for any construction. So there was a version control problem with what was written in the sheet and then what got printed in the agenda. So we will correct that for council for the next meeting.
Yeah.
We do not get 200 meters of pathway for only $130,000.
Well, that's what I was trying to get to.
No, yes. So it is purely the planning exercise as I had described, and we will update the sheet for you prior to approval.
Turns out I was right too then, thank you.
Yes,
So
that's why I was scrambling going, I have to read the sheet because it's not what I remembered was in the sheet, so.
So do we get any construction on Bow Valley Trail next year in that regard?
No.
Oh,
No.
Unless you want to fund it. Your own pocket.
not at this point in time.
If you recollect, when we did the slow sort of sweeping improvements to South Canmore, it will allow us to plan that.
Right.
And that was very methodical, and it happened over 5 years, and we threw, I think, $1.3 million at it every year, and over 5 years, boom, South Canmore's pretty again. Yeah. So it helps us plan our dollars more efficiently as opposed to being scattered.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
And I
Okay.
think that the interface between those two neighborhoods is really important to pin down.
Yes.
All righty then, let's
Move on.
move on.
Sorry for that. My apologies.
I made a note of it.
Yeah.
That was another mea culpa, wasn't it?
You didn't say it.
Right, so what's next? We'll go and talk about anything else. So this was just administration's proposed amendments. And then we'll bring everything all together for a decision of council in December, much like we have historically brought the passing of the budget to council in December. So now, it's your turn.
Yeah. So as with everything this year, we're sort of learning as we go along. It's a completely new process.
Yeah.
But if any councillors have any amendments that they've been thinking they may propose for the 2018 capital particularly, then this is a good time to start it. It doesn't preclude bringing in a proposed amendment when it's at council. But if anybody's been thinking that there's something they'd like to propose to see happen in 2018, we could start the discussion now.
So this would just be for discussion, because we couldn't make any decisions, right?
Well, the committee would make a decision to give
Take forward to
direction to it and then
council.
to work that into the presentation for council.
Okay.
So do you have something in mind?
Well, no, it's not actually, it won't work this go-around. It's something I should have addressed earlier when we were discussing the budget. So I'm just going to have to do that.
Okay.
Because it's not, if we've made that decision that we're not going to bring anything forward that isn't extraordinary.
Well, that was admin's decision, yeah.
That's admin saying that. If you have something
So
you
we
want to put
hadn't
on
said
the
that.
table.
I mean,
No, that's the expectation, is the budget's approved 2018.
yeah.
If things
So-
change or anything changes, the budget can be changed as well. So, no matter how outlandish it may be, a councillor can propose a change at this time.
Well, I had a little bit of work to do, so that's the problem. I mean, because I'm not sure what the numbers are, and I think it actually might be sort of a reworking of something of one of our partners, so partner
So
organizations.
it's probably better to condition that for presentation if you want at the council meeting,
Yeah,
if you want. You may
Yeah.
decide in discussion between now and then that you don't
I
want.
want to let it go, yeah. So,
Or leave it for next year's discussion or whatever.
yep.
But if you do get to the point where you're gonna wanna bring something to council, then once you've conditioned it, it's best to share it with us sooner rather than later,
Yeah,
so that we all prep for it.
Yeah, and those parameters were self-imposed parameters that administration took. So we wanted to make sure that we were really stringent and stingy, and put a really hard lens, and that was our parameters. That doesn't mean council needs to follow those same parameters.
and so what are we looking at? Do we know yet what the tax increase would be?
It's the same as
It's
what's
the
in the
same.
budget.
What we
Okay.
approved.
So 3.7.
Okay,
But that's a point that I wanted to make, is if council at this time wanted to see the tax requirement reduced, one way of doing that is to not support something that's in this list, because right now this is a net zero. There's additions, there's decreases. We end up exactly the same
Where we
amount
were.
required as we talked about last year. But there's nothing that leaps off the page for me, but somebody may want to suggest something other than what's proposed by administration here that might have an impact on the ultimate tax requirement. Councilman Callum, did you have something?
Yeah, I just actually, I don't have anything particularly prepared in terms of a cost or a budget item, but I did want to have a broader discussion with the group to understand if you heard something similar during the election that I did, and that perhaps it might be something that we want administration to go away with, investigate, and bring back a price for us, because I don't have that expertise. So I seemed to hear, and it's a balance, right, in terms of when we talk about bylaw, and I know that that we have a position that's being temporarily proposed for 2018 as a contract to deal with illegal short-term rentals, et cetera, and that will change as our discussion around short-term rentals as a community may or may not change. But I just wanted to capture from the larger group what your feelings would be with regards to looking at more bylaw staff or an additional bylaw position. And part of that is around the fact that in many cases, as we know, bylaw infractions are based on reporting, on the members of the public reporting. And I think that I know that I've heard, and I can't speak for other people, that perhaps bylaw is overtasked in terms of the follow through with the public as to, somebody calls, they leave a message, assuming that that message is being acted on, what the follow through is that just about a bylaw person? Is that about administration in bylaw? What is that? And I just, I know that I heard a lot at the doors in terms of off-leash dogs and expectations that people have in terms of how the community is going to be run and how that fits in with our human use management review goals and those achievements that we hope to make over the coming years. That's basically all but I just wanted to hear what other people had to say and what perhaps you heard more of. I think that the balance in that is that, do we want to be a super rulesy town, right?
No.
Because I think that's what was really cool about Canmore is that we have we're a laid back community, but at the same time we have parameters because of where we live that require a certain level of policing. And are we meeting those goals, and are we meeting a community expectation with those goals, and at the same time not being too rulesy?
Just one thought, and we can discuss this, of course. Right now, our practice is sort of away from strict enforcement, and so often, I think we know this, that enforcement bylaw will be out there, and they could issue a ticket or something, but they choose not to. It's more educational, do better. So it could be that we could see enforcement, actual fining increase without needing additional staff, and just a different shift on priorities or the direction to the bylaw officers. Don't be so nice. But certainly what you've described, I've heard, and I'm sure others have, and particularly around off-leash dogs. And there was, one of the forums, there's quite a discussion around enforcing the anti-idling bylaws, although people don't necessarily understand the bylaw. But there's also false expectations I heard around enforcing cycling, for instance, or going through stop signs and that sort of thing, which isn't a bylaw. That's RCMP. So some of the enforcement thing is false expectation for bylaw, and some of the lack of enforcement, and Sally can speak to this as the general manager, but some of it's around our intent not to enforce. And if what the community is saying is they want more enforcement, that's good information to use. And it may be that it would require additional bylaw officers to meet that need, but Ms. May?
I think that, I certainly heard people wanted more, thought they wanted more enforcement, but I think what they really wanted was a better outcome. Like they wanted to be effective enforcement and to get people out of the corridors in particular, to get cyclists off the sidewalks, to get them to stop at stop signs, to various things. And also, I'm the council member on WildSmart, and we've been talking about this quite a lot, the education piece. They don't have enough resources to do the kinds of things that they'd like in the community in terms of the humor review, anyway. So I think what we want to do is do something that's effective and gets to the outcome that we want. And I 100% agree with you that we don't want to be too rulesy. One of the odd things that I heard that made me feel a little sad was I said to one person, well, have you tried talking to your neighbor about this issue? And they said, no, I am so relieved we have bylaw and I don't have to talk to my neighbor. And it made me sad, Yeah. So I hear what you're saying. I heard the same thing. And I think there might be sort of a multi-pronged approach, right? Better use of volunteers in terms of the wildlife and the WildSmart ambassadors, that kind of thing, and better training and a number of things. But I'm not sure. I don't think we have like crazy wild scofflaw crime sprees out there.
And I guess what I heard a lot of was a lack of, or a lack of follow through. And that doesn't mean that the work isn't being done and that enforcement isn't happening, but just that follow through to the public. Hey, yeah, by the way, this is what we've done. These are the steps we've taken. That's what I heard of. That's what, and I heard bits and snippets of different things, and it's trying to put weight to what those things really mean. And is it just about somebody from across town not liking that that person's house doesn't look the way they think it should be and getting rulesy? Or is it about something that's real and it's affecting somebody's life or affecting our quality of life as a community? And that's that, again, that rulesy balance that you want to keep in play. And
Karen?
Yeah, Karen's got something to say.
Okay. Well, when I was out in the community, my main thing was, they said it's a complaint-based bylaw, and that there was no follow-through at all. If there was any, it was responded to them is talk to your neighbor, and they've exhausted that process, and there was still nothing being done. And this is like in a 2-3 year time frame. So it was more like follow through.
How many people did you talk to that had that concern?
I would say at least 8.
Okay.
And they had gone through contacting, talking to different people, and there was just no follow through, or if there was, it was deal with it yourself. So I don't know where the problem lays.
And I agree with the neighbor approach. I think that we've gotten out of
I
the
agree
habit
too.
of not talking to our neighbors because we just want somebody else to deal with the conflict. And I
But
think
if
that
it's-
should always be a starting point.
It is start, but if it continues on for a 2 or 3 year process.
Yeah, so
Rob?
I just,
Hold on, sorry, Rob's got a point.
Yeah.
question?
Yeah, just when I was door knocking and everything else, enforcement, off-leash dogs in wildlife corridors came to, and so I tried to explore that a little bit. Education, they almost always no enforcement. People know the laws, people know the rules, and we want enforcement. So I heard that over and over again.
So if I can just, yeah, I think what I'm hearing is quite a bit of, I think there's some philosophical principles we maybe need to work with council on to define. So a couple of things. I mean, I think throwing more staff at this isn't maybe necessarily the answer just yet, because I know, yeah, no, I appreciate it, but I'm just thinking it's not clear to me yet what we would be tasking those staff with doing. So if there are administrative issues, and I would really love to talk to those 8 people or anybody else just in terms of understanding the issues. One of the things I see sometimes, and I'm not saying this is always true, I think there are, of course, things we can and need to do better. But sometimes people will say there's been no follow through, and that means I didn't get the result I wanted, not that our staff haven't followed through. So I really need to understand where and when we haven't actually followed through, and where and when people aren't getting the result they wanted, and to understand where the issues are. I do think the complaint-driven thing is significant, and I think you spoke to this in council orientation too as an issue. We have philosophically, years ago, made a decision to not be heavy on enforcement and to be more proactive in trying to get people to talk to one another. We might want to make a bit of a change in strategy there. I guess what I'm saying is I think there's a bigger strategic discussion about direction and outcomes. And I know part of what we're doing in 2018 and in council orientation, we took your list of what you heard and what the big issues are, and this was one of them. So I'm imagining in 2018 we need to have a bigger conversation around that and get clear on some outcomes, and then that may in 2019 mean staffing, that may mean administrative systems, that may, that could mean, to Esme's point, funding for other organizations who do education. There might be multiple things, but I think working with council to get some clarity on issue definition and philosophical strategy, then we can figure out how to resource it.
I'm happy with that result, and I'm happy with reporting, to following through with those 8 people that you're speaking of, because I think that's important. I just knew that if we don't bring it up now, we're going to be waiting a full 12 months for, if there's a budget implication, it will be till 2020.
In the short term in 2018, we can do things, we can look at service level changes with the resources we have to start to impact it, and then for 2019, if there are any budget. But at this point, it's not even clear to me. We might be able to, with some changes in strategy, address a lot of things with the resources we have.
And there might be certain things that we don't want to do
right.
Driven, and we don't want to do a warning first. We might want to go straight to enforcement, and that's fine, but I think that you're right, that needs to be refined with council. I just wanted to bring it up. Sorry. I just wanted to bring it up now because of timing.
Yeah, noted.
Yeah. Now's the time to do it.
Yep.
So we'll definitely have that discussion in the new year.
Can I just ask a
Councillor
question?
Sanford?
We are contemplating an organizational review. Would bylaw fall under that process?
Yes, I mean, the whole organization is up for review. I don't think what we're doing with the organization review is doing service delivery review.
Okay.
Right, so that's really about the organizational structure, as I understand it, and how we are organized, where people sit, who they report to, literally the structure. Service delivery is something different.
Okay.
But to your question, one of the things we have been doing for several years are department service level reviews, and maybe bylaw is one that we want to put on the list. This year we're doing IT. In the past we've done HR and communication and streets and roads. Bylaw might be one that's due for that kind of review.
Is that through the
CAO's budget, the former audit committee, which is now through the CAO's budget. Yeah.
Because I know that Banff uses a different formula, the service area reviews, and they do it. I think they do it annually, don't they, with all the departments? It's an intensive
They have quite
process.
a document, a big document that they work with Gord McIntosh to do on assessing service level and whether or not changes or improvements are needed.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's an interesting evaluation opportunity, and it is annual, I believe. So if things, like I heard a lot during the election as well, and some of the input that I got feels like it was deferred until the election. Like, why didn't we hear this before the election? You know, why is it all of a sudden a big issue that we're only hearing about, you know, and we heard it at the doors, so, do we want people to save up their concerns until an election? Not really. We want to hear that information as we go along, so we might need some different mechanisms, that's all.
Councillor Seeley?
Just a couple things that came up as well. Composting strategy. 2019 is probably better year to get into budget. But I'm wondering if we could consider in 2018 something. Jasper and Banff both have composting strategies. Canmore might be able to take advantage of some of those, do something temporary. There could be some cost offsets of going to.
So we have previously looked into the issue of composting and what that would look like, and we have current direction from council. We are exploring the garburator system as a potential option. I think our administration's preference would be to see that process through and then to use that information to inform what next steps might look like prior to, as we've seen with the recycling, providing expensive facilities does not necessarily translate into a substantial increase or a change in people's behavior. And so we want to be aware of that before we move forward. There are certainly some members of the public who have a very strong interest in and are looking for a composting. And again, we need to see what is the best way to achieve the objective from a cost-effective perspective. And so we'd like to see the garburator proposal or process complete itself before moving on something else.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, there's two things. One is I think Councillor Slee, that has been in front of council before, and council said no to it due to cost, because at the time it was not one of council's top priorities. In 2018, we will be working with council on defining new priorities for 2019 and go forward. So that would be a great time to raise this if it is going to become one, and then we will look at costing it. The second thing I think that's really important there is that, as I understand it, and Mike, you might know more about this than me, there's significant issues with contamination in Banff, and that is, it's not a successful program there. And so we need to move very cautiously, I think, before we institute the same program here if it's not successful in our neighboring municipality. So we certainly, it's on the list, and you know, I heard that too around the election. And so I think the best way to talk about it then is in 2018 as part of a strategic priority setting, get some bigger picture direction from council, which could include things like carburetors, and then we'll figure out for 2019 if and where we're going.
And I guess part of my thought too was the curbside recycling. We're not reducing waste as a community, so this could lead into that, but it is a bigger discussion. So as long as it's on the radar and we're talking about it.
Well, we're not doing curbside in anything, just so you know. But then, when I met with the core group and talked with others as well, a couple of key points I wanted to highlight was, first of all, we have been talking about, and it's not so much about composting, it's about organic waste handling. We've been talking about that for several years, and we chose to look more deeply into using carburetors as a means of dealing with organic wastes. And we haven't got the final report yet on that, but composting, municipal composting might be something that we'll end up doing. And in 2018, I spoke with the core group and said, you know, it is going to be a conversation in 2018. It's not going to translate into a massive rollout of a program in 2018, but if, depending on what we learn from the garburator approach and what we learn from all of the other municipalities that are currently doing composting, and bear in mind it's much easier for most municipalities because they can do curbside compost picking up, and we can't here, so it's a very expensive proposition. But to your point, I saw on the news just last night from Calgary, they're doing a trial curbside composting program in certain neighborhoods, and they were showing the compost police going around, and they're literally walking up and down the alleyway checking the compost bin, and the guy was saying 25% that's contamination, 50%, then they would put a lock on it and a big tag and turn it around. So, and we're not taking that. And that's the real challenge is there's so much contamination in the organic collection that once you can't take it to the organic composting facility, they will send it back.
Well, and in all recycling, we know now that the way to get the most compliance is exactly that, where you have to put it out in front of your home, where it's checked, and it's left behind if it's not done properly. And the cities that have the best diversion rates, those are the kind of programs they have. One of the unintended consequences of the bare bins and then our beyond curbside recycling program is because it's anonymous, the compliance and the ability to dump things inappropriately are significant issues for us. And so that is an issue for us in recycling. It's going to become you're going to hear even more about it as contamination and issues is becoming more and more significant. And so I don't know that we're ready yet to move to another anonymous program, given the issues that we have around that. So,
But again, I would point out.
The more important message is there will be discussions this year.
yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
So-
and it's actually in the 5-year capital plan. It's contemplated in the 5-year capital plan is organic infrastructure for that, should it be approved, and should it be appropriate for our community.
Something else I heard a lot about was enhanced snow clearing, and I guess Volker 7, we use them to contract, and they have bigger machinery, and there was a lot of comments about the local roads not being cleared because we don't have access to the proper machinery to be able to do that. And with climate change and everything else, icebreakers might be something that we want to do. I'm not suggesting we do it this year. I'm thinking that we have to look into the future and what equipment do we need to do a better job of clearing snow.
You were talking to somebody that knows a lot about snow clearing equipment?
I was.
Oh, I see.
And there's one road that they just going to get to, and they said, you know what, just leave it alone, because if you don't have the right equipment, it makes a mess, and we need finer equipment. And what I've noticed, because of climate change, sometimes you get a big snowstorm, and if it melts and freezes again, you've got some problems. So icebreakers are getting more common in communities, just to break that up.
So that is something we can certainly look at as we build out 2019 budget and see what the experience is this year.
Okay.
Everybody's finished talking, turn the lights off, and I'll know who wants to talk.
Well, I was just going to speak to the garbage and solid waste and recycling and all of that. And I guess what I'd like to see is some kind of, and I don't know how we do this, but some kind of evaluation of our practices. So what we say we do versus what we actually manage to accomplish and the outcomes, and build out a long-term plan. The thing about it is that it seems to me that technology is zooming ahead at this pace, and you go ahead and you buy into a system or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, there's this better system, and there's all these flaws in the system that we've bought.
Yeah,
Kind of like buying that new car, same
so
thing.
that's the discussion we'll be having next year,
Good,
not part of the budget discussion.
okay, I'm just
Right.
raising it.
Hold that thought, right?
Okay, for a year.
No, for this coming year, we'll be having that
Okay.
discussion. 2018, which
Gotcha.
is starting in a little over a month.
Okay.
Because we all want to have that discussion.
Okay.
Vi, did you have something? Counselor?
Maybe Mike can speak to this. I was just wondering with the transportation planning for Bull Valley Trail, when they do this study, do they go out and physically see what's going on Bull Valley Trail when they do the study, or they just do strict planning?
So there's a number of...
Mike?
So you told me to turn it off.
When you're not talking.
So there are a number of initiatives that go into the study. There is obviously some transportation science behind it, but there's a whole aspect of community engagement that includes meeting with residents and businesses directly in the neighborhood, doing walkthroughs and whatnot. So site visits and site survey is absolutely an extensive part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Yes?
If there's nothing else, then I would like an opportunity to talk about where we go from here.
Perfect. Are there any other questions, considerations, new ideas? In which case, why don't you tell us where we go from here?
Well, I would like direction from the Finance Committee as to what you want me to do with these amendments. So that would be in the form of a motion from the Finance Committee as to direction for administration.
Mm-hmm. And if I recall, we didn't get into any amendments or discussion about changes. We've gone through the presentation. So, what are you snorkeling about? Oh, it's a funny. So I'll put a motion forward to approve all of the recommended amendments to go to inform the budget for council decision. And then if you wanted to say, like to propose an amendment to take this item out or whatever, that's how we change this proposed schedule of amendments. Otherwise, if everybody is comfortable with all of the changes that are suggested, then the motion is quite simple, and committee would approve having administration bring this to council for final approval. And bear in mind that there's always the opportunity when it gets to council to, something came up between now and then they hadn't thought of, and there can be a discussion about it then. So
yeah, just because you approve it for us to bring it to council for consideration doesn't mean that you're approving the amendment.
yeah, well, there's a number of important things, but one of the important messages is net zero impact on the tax requirements that were approved for 2018 last year, so that's important. We're not changing the tax requirements from what we said would be the requirements last year. Maybe the council wants to change that, in which case we have to find ways of changing the budget, but I haven't heard anything in the discussion to lead me to believe that there's any intent for any significant changes. Now would be a good time for somebody to hit their light and say, well, you know, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Councillor?
Well, personally, I would like to see that $22,500 removed from the community enrichment administrative salary, because I think that department could look at.
So, I'm sorry, do you want to have a discussion or wait until the motion and then propose that?
Oh, sorry,
an
you want to, okay, well, I thought you were asking us to.
I was just kind of laying the field so people knew how it was going to work.
Okay.
So if you're considering something and if there's no need for any other sort of general discussion, I can put the motion on the table and then propose an amendment. Okay. So if everybody's ready for the motion, then that's what I'll put the motion on the table to approve the proposed budget amendment, to approve the proposed budget amendments as recommended by administration to bring to council. Councillor Sanford.
Actually, I have a question, if I could,
Mm-hmm.
for that. So my question is, when the affiliates ask us for money, if we wanted to change something in that, would that be 2019 going forward? Like, would that be next year when we look at the when we look at our kind of long-term strategy, all that
That's
stuff?
something that can be walked on by a councillor at budget,
Okay.
but without the affiliate actually asking for it, and they've sort of missed their opportunity.
Right. So
But
when
they
would
did have
their
that
opportunity have been? I'm just
just
trying to.
recently.
So we did, as part of the budget process, just when we put the call out to managers for changes, we
Okay.
put it out to all the affiliates as well.
Okay.
We did only hear from one affiliate, and that affiliate did not meet any of the criteria that Catherine outlined
Okay.
at the start. So every affiliate had the opportunity to make proposed budget amendments, just like every town department did
Okay.
in this process. So nobody brought anything forward that met the criteria. And again, we only heard from one, correct? So they will get a call next year in June or July when we start the regular budget process to bring their next budget request for 2019 forward.
So is there an opportunity before that for a counselor, rather than just at budget, to examine how we allocate those dollars? Because certain affiliates are governed by other acts, not necessarily town legislation, you know, so I just don't understand how we get to make that decision for that budget.
Yep, so we certainly can work with you on understanding that. I think probably the best thing to do is just to let us know if there's a particular affiliate that you're thinking about or group of affiliates. And then we usually have different one of us who try to work with those affiliates. So whoever the staff rep is, that's probably the best place to begin, is to meet with you and explain what we know. Okay. And then that might include a meeting down the road with the affiliate as well.
Okay.
And it's also important for councillors to remember that this is administration's work and their recommendation. And they didn't accept extraordinary changes or whatever, but you can.
Okay.
And if you have information that you have that the rest of us don't have, that you feel particularly strongly about, and you could bring that as a proposed amendment to the budget at council.
Okay.
If you feel strongly that there's an affiliate that we should consider an increased budget for, that can happen next month.
Okay, I need to have a couple conversations
Yeah,
first,
I would talk
so,
with
yeah.
Catherine particularly and others.
All right, I just need to understand, you know I understand Bow Valley Regional Housing really well, because I sat on that board, and how, they make that requisition and so forth, so I'll just inform myself better and go to admin and talk about that.
You bet.
Thanks.
Rob, did you have something?
Just a question for Councillor Sanford. I thought before asking that question, we were going to wait for some information back from administration to learn a little bit more about it. No?
What are you talking about?
The motion that Councillor Sanford was going to make about contemplating that.
Haven't heard it yet.
Oh, I heard where she was starting though.
Got a hint. Yeah.
Okay, I'll
so
leave it
if
then.
she puts that forward, then
okay,
that's a good time to talk to it. Do you have a...
Is it time? Then I will take the opportunity. I would like to propose that the increased community enrichment of $22,500 and $22,500 in administration salary be taken out at this point, because I think that community enrichment has the option to refine that program, and it has other avenues of using information and other processes that we've already put in place, for instance, the 211 process. And I think that we need to evaluate how we do these service deliveries and control them. And I think this is a good opportunity to do that.
So maybe I misunderstand something, but I understood this to be the position that specific to the affordability.
It's to
To
staff,
administer the affordability
to provide
program.
more staff.
To administer the affordability program.
To go from a 3-day, what I thought I
Yeah.
heard Sally.
But what's driving the need is the affordability program itself, because I understood it's so wildly successful, 700, 800.
Well, and I think that we need to examine how we deliver that program instead of just staffing it more. Because I think that there's an opportunity to look and say, yes, it's very successful. Is it meeting the needs of the community, or are there other avenues that we can integrate and coordinate rather than just adding more staff?
Sure, and I'm always happy to reduce budget if possible. Did you have something? Your hand went up, or? No, I. Okay, so you've got an amendment on the table to remove that budget increase, and I'll speak against the amendment at this time. Honestly, I would need more information to understand the pros and cons of what you're suggesting, so I won't support the amendment at this table. But between now and when it comes to council, I'll take the time to better understand that budget item and perhaps be on the same page as you then. But my understanding of the need and the benefit of the service that we're seeing, the far greater response to that service suggests to me that $22,500 is easy to justify. So that's to your amendment. Happy to have other people speak to the amendment. Councillor?
I'm inclined not to support it at this time, but I wouldn't mind being reminded, because I know we get a wealth of information from this department in terms of their programs and services. And I should maybe go back and remind myself of how that works, how it's organized, and how it's distributed to the public. I'd forgotten about the 211 program, for example. I've never used it myself. So it would be good to see, I don't know, that information again, and I can do that myself. But I just think that the benefits of that program have been huge to folks who are trying to stay in the community and trying to access services. So I'm not inclined to support it, but I wouldn't mind seeing maybe a beefier project summary or something. Sure. Yeah.
Councillor McCallum?
So I will remind that affordability was Council's #1 priority in the last term, and it's still a priority of mine in particular, and that I would really struggle to wrap my head around taking services away from our most vulnerable citizens in our community that are looking to hang on by their fingertips through this, and the opportunity for our staff to interface with these vulnerable citizens and help them connect with other services that just don't exist in Canmore but in the Valley. It seems strange to purposefully underfund a wildly successful program that's helping people stay here and helping people not just survive but thrive. So I won't be able to support that. That being said, I think that that department continuously and will continue to continuously look at streamlining and improving how they deliver services in our community. And I don't think that $22,500 is the right place in the right budget to try and trim things down. There's got to be another place, and I challenge you to find it.
Councillor Comfort, did you have?
A reply? A response to that?
No, your light's still on.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Sanford, did you have?
Well, and that is the challenge, to find those dollars. That is the challenge. And with a program like this that's fairly open-ended, and it was a new program that had obviously criteria that weren't well established, and I think we can probably work on determining a better criteria. There are other agencies and other organizations that help the vulnerable people in the community. I don't know that we want to be everything to all people, because we don't have the resources to do that. So let's coordinate better. Let's talk about the coordination of those services.
Well, and that's a fair statement, but I think that when FCSS and Ms. Brown actually presented about the success of the affordability program, that's when she identified that there were people at that time, that was several months ago, were applying to get in that weren't appropriate. And those changes have already been made. They've been made for months now. And even with those changes, we've gone from 400 to 700 people with those changes. So it's clear that it's a very needed service. I would be interested to know if you would be making the same amendment if we were talking about seniors. But because it's young people and because it's working poor,
no,
which is basically...
I wouldn't say that it's a demographic exercise, because I'm sure there are many seniors and young people.
You're right.
No, so I'm not talking about any kind of demographic distinction whatsoever.
I just think that there's probably a better place, if you were so keen to find $22,500, that there's got to be a better place than on the backs of the working poor in Canmore.
Okay, so Councillor Mara?
If someone could just remind me what the base budget was before we add the 22.5?
Zero.
Oh, because it says an increase.
No.
To that position, to that.
Rick's looking it up.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll just
It
take.
may not be something that can be.
I'm wondering if we
separated
could
out.
actually say publicly, because it is a person's salary.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
So it's coded within a larger salary
Okay.
line and budget, but we can privately get you what
Okay.
the amount is.
Okay.
And we can provide that to all of council. I just don't know that we can say publicly, because
Okay.
it would identify one person's salary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But you indicated it would be taking a position from from
Point
3 days
six.
to 5 days.
3 days to 5 days, so what's
So
considered
the
right now a
budget now would
0.6
be
FTE to a 1, yeah.
So it's allowing for 2 more days a week in that position. Is there other debate on Councillor Sanford's amending motion?
Can I say something? I don't know, is this formal, like
really.
a council meeting? Okay.
We can ask you questions, but you can't enter the debate.
I'd like to ask Dr. Cottle a question.
What's your question? What's your question? And it can't be, what was it you were going to say?
I was just thinking how to phrase it, for God's sake.
Okay, Sally, what did you want to say?
Okay, so, do you think that there are efficiencies to be gained in FCSS by perhaps combining programs or eliminating aspects of them like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can tell you that every year FCSS, and this position, it's a little bit tricky because currently the 0.6 position, the 3 days a week, is funded by FCSS. The 0.4 increase would be out of community social development. So community social development is the department, and we have a manager of community social development who is funded 100% by the town of Canmore. In community social development, we have FCSS, which is funded on a provincial split, 80-20, and then Parent Link, which is funded largely by the province. So the two, FCSS and Parent Link, are both provided largely by the province with some town funding, but the community social development department and the manager of that department are funded 100% by the town of Canmore. So the increase of this position from 0.6 to FTE to 1 full FTE, that 0.4 would actually be funded under community social development, not FCSS. It's complicated or difficult because of the way it's set up right now. The 0.6 is under the FCSS. So the 0.4 funding would go under the community social development, just to be clear, right? Because right now, community social development doesn't have any admin support, nor does Parent Link. FCSS does, but the other two departments don't. So it's a way of trying to get that some admin support for the entire department, not just for FCSS. In terms of their programs, every year the FCSS team does what they call a feather and fluff or something. I forget the exact title, but they actually do an analysis of what are we offering, what are our current programs and services, what are the numbers, what kind of uptake do we have, what are we hearing from the community? And they look at programs that they can streamline, ones that they can stop delivering, and then they look at the new ones that they want to bring on in capacity. So they do try to do that work every year and make changes to programs based on need and uptake and community demand.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if there's no further discussion on the amending motion.
So that 0.4 position, what kind of, what percentage of a tax increase does that equate to? Like not even.
22,000 of,
percent?
it's a little more than 1%? 0.1? 0.1?
So
It's a little more than
0.1%.
0.1.
Like a little more than 1/10%.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call the question unless there's some other burning argument. Calling the question on the amending motion. Those in support? Opposed? Motion's defeated. With Councillor Sanford in support. Back to the Finance Committee members. All right, you are.
Yes,
That's right.
oh.
And can you what?
I just want to add, like I had asked Dr. Cottle in our discussion if they could sort of beef up that report, and I'm wondering if that will happen.
Absolutely. So now that it still will come forward going to council, we will, when it comes to council for approval as part of the budget, we will include additional
relevant
information. I've taken notes on the feedback and questions, and I'll make sure that they get addressed.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are there any other changes to propose? Councillor Sanford? Oh. Going once, going twice, no other amendments? In which case, we're back to calling the question on the primary motion, which is to approve, give direction to administration to bring these amendments to council for approval as part of the 2018 budget. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. With that, I'll move the committee be adjourned. Councillor Sanford supporting that, I'm sure. Adjourned. We're adjourned. We're adjourned. Okay, let's skedaddle.